Hi, Jose.
Yeah.
Julie McCann, head of sales at Ignite Data, and I'm here talking with Dr. Galvez.
Hi, Julie.
Would you
It's
like to
great
introduce
talking to you
yourself?
again. So I'm Jose Galvez. I am the Chief Medical Officer at Ignite Data.
Jose, I would love to get your perspective. You were at the FDA for many years of your life, and actually, maybe you could just talk about your experience and why you landed at Ignite Data.
Sure. So I started my federal career at NIH and was basically at the NCI and the clinical center, and then from there moved on to the FDA. And what I saw primarily is the main focus really is how do we empower pharma and industry to do what they do best, which is really do research and bring product to market. And how do we support that? And how do we make sure that those products are safe and efficacious? So at the FDA, our role really was to take a look at what industry is doing, validate their results, and just make sure for the general public that what goes to market is safe and efficacious. And if there's any issues or problems, working with pharma to correct that and make sure that again that we're bringing good quality products to the market. So throughout my career, I've really looked at how to help researchers do that, how to move science forward, and I really love the mission that we have at Ignite Data. We do EHR to EDC. It's all about making sure that that data moves from the source where it's gathered at the patient, at the bedside, that's where the data starts, and moving it with high fidelity into those clinical data systems, into the systems, into our EDCs, our electronic data capture systems. And traditionally, this has always been done on paper. This has always done what we always called swivel chair data capture. And it's just riddled with errors because people have to transcribe these things. And you wouldn't think it's hard, but when you've done it 10 million times, it gets tedious and there's always the chance for errors. Computers don't make errors. They just pick up what is there, off it goes down the wire, and that's what we're doing. And I think it's really critical because we are making it easier for patients to participate in clinical trials. We're making it easier for pharma to get that data and know that that data is reliable.
Tell me a little bit about how you see, with your history and kind of visioning forward. You have some interesting thoughts around digital protocols and
Mhm.
data infrastructure, and there's so much conversation, and we have a lot of different folks in various innovation. Right? You've got your hospital research sites, government, you've got our sponsor side, and there's so much innovation happening. But what do you see kind of going forward in clinical research?
You're right. We have a lot, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of different players. And they all have their point to contribute, but we need a way to coordinate it better. We need a way to organize it. And in a way that is easy and facilitates getting patients onto clinical trials, getting pharma involved with clinical trials, and a way that allows us to bring more patients to the market. So one of the things that is been slowing this down is the lack of a digital protocol. So right now, protocols are authored by scientists. They're basically, it's authored like a manuscript. They write it all down. Someone has to read that, translate it into the electronic capture systems. And because of that, it's difficult for patients to find clinical trials. Where do they go to find clinical trials? There's no central place for this to happen. It's difficult for physicians when they're seeing the patient to think, gee, this patient is going to benefit from a clinical trial, even if their medical group is participating. Physicians have 15 minutes max with a patient. So in that 15 minutes, they have to focus their attention on you and how to help you. And oftentimes, making sure that you're on a clinical trial isn't the first thing that pops into their mind. So we need ways to make it easier to bring it to their attention that perhaps, the patient would benefit from a clinical trial. One way to do that is to have digital protocols, which are machine readable, which are tagged with the appropriate metadata, and that's critical. We have to have the right metadata so the computers understand the language that is used. And so we can build support systems that will alert physicians when a patient's can go on a clinical trial, when we can take those case report forms directly from that digital protocol and have it built into the EDCs more efficiently, have it built in products like ours, like Archer, more efficiently, without having to have people translate this every single time. Every time a person gets involved and we have to translate it manually, there's a slight chance for error. There's a slight chance that there's a miscommunication. And so that's, I think, important.
How far off are we to getting to a digital protocol?
Unfortunately, well, not too far off.
Okay.
So IHC has been working on this now for a number of years, and they have the M11 project, and they've been working with FDA, EMA, and other groups within pharma, Transcelerate in particular, and other standards bodies, both the HL7 and CDISC are all involved. So we have a really wide range of participants, really good stakeholders. And we have basically our first draft of what that digital protocol looks like. The next phase really needs to focus in on the digital component. How do we represent it in a way that computers can consume easily? And that can range anywhere from specs like CDISC is putting together, that can range from implementation guides like HL7 is putting together, and that's really the next step. To be honest, I think we're still probably a year or two away, or maybe a couple years away from being able to consume that.
Mm-hmm.
But the more groups like us, the more groups like pharma insist that IHC moves on this, the more validation and pressure they'll have to get it done quicker. They need to prioritize.
Okay, I'm going to pivot and go towards back to the ROI. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about value. And sponsors are always wanting to know a couple different reasons why they buy, right? They buy to address key critical assets that need to advance to the market faster. Maybe there's a competitive product with new indications. You also have, earlier phases where sponsors are wanting faster go-no decisions. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on why and how Ignite Data actually enables earlier visibility and patient safety.
Yeah, this is great, and this is, to be honest, one of the reasons why I really wanted to join, or I really joined Ignite Data, is because we do bring so much value to market. I think you touched on a lot of key points, and the value proposition I think is different depending on who's measuring it and what you're trying to measure. So at the end of the day, EHR to EDC means getting data into those systems faster, so it can be reviewed by clinicians and researchers quicker. It means accurate data, so they don't have to question, well, is this data accurate, and have to send queries back to the sites to validate that data is correct. So they can be assured that what they're looking at, they're able to make decisions on. And because we are able to work with so many EHR systems, we're able to have deeper reach into the sites where patients are. So you mentioned those early phase studies. Oftentimes, those populations are very small. They're spread out in sometimes even rural areas or not necessarily in large urban areas. And so we have to get that data from the patients in those clinical settings. And by having systems like Archer, we're able to communicate with the EMRs at the patient's bedside in those groups and get the data into the EDCs quicker and more reliably. So the value, what's the value proposition? There's several. One is because we're getting data in quicker, they're able to make decisions faster. So we could go from what would be weeks and months down to days. Because essentially at the bedside, once the researcher clicks on the data elements that go over the wire, they're sent into the EDC system immediately. So they get to see those data points much quicker and make those go, no-go decisions. The other thing is looking at those critical data points. We're talking about cardiac enzymes. We're talking about your liver function tests. Making sure that looking at those toxicity studies and making sure that if these patients are being harmed in any way by these drugs, we're able to catch that quickly and either stop a study or take them off a study. Conversely, when the researcher is looking at, does the drug do what we think it does? Oftentimes you don't need to go through the entire clinical trial to measure that. You need a few patients to really look at those key indicators. And if we can get that into pharma quickly, they can make those decisions quickly and decide to continue on with the clinical trial, because this is ultimately something that will go to a regulatory decision, or this is not something that's working, it's not profitable, and they're going to stop a clinical trial and use those research dollars, a very limited resource, to develop the next product.
Okay, let's turn the corner. Why are some sponsors slower to adopt a technology like IgniteData than others? From your medical perspective.
So from the medical perspective, medicine is a very slow-moving science. It's steeped in tradition, and it's just the way we've done things. Medicine is still very much a paper-based practice. Even though we have electronic medical records, oftentimes the way we follow data, it hasn't changed for 50 years. It's still, basically, we took those paper-based methodologies and just stuffed them into a computer. So if you're looking at why people are slow to change, I think partly it's human nature. We've been doing it this way for years, and it's difficult to envision a way of doing things that are different and still give you the same results.
How do you see IgniteData partnering with sponsors to help them feel comfortable in change? We're getting to change management now.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's change management. So it's several things. One, we need to work closely with the sites to make sure that we have the systems and checks and balances in place to know that we can connect to their systems with high fidelity. And so that's one thing. Sponsors want to make sure that when the data flows from a site into their system, that it's going to do so reliably. So that's one area. The other area, on the sponsor side, work with them and their EDC systems for the same thing. Make sure that we can connect and prove that we can push data into their systems in a way that's reliable and they can expect it. And they know what to expect, that they can know that the data will go in there reliably and fill those forms out correctly. So that's one thing. The other area, which I think is more complex, is in how do we map a clinical trial? How do we map those CRFs, all those data points from one system to another system? And that's where we need to work both with the sites and the sponsors to get that mapping correctly. And that's all about the metadata, which codes are being used on both sides. Are we looking at LOINC codes? Are we looking at SNOMED codes? Are we looking at lab-specific codes that aren't mapped to a standard library? And those are the things we need to work on with both of them to build a confidence that what we're transferring is, in fact, accurate and correct.
Why is this an important step? And I ask the question because in the industry there's variation in how you manage your data and how you move it. But why is how we map it important?
So mapping is critical, and it's critical because medicine's an art, and oftentimes the same words have different meanings depending on the context. And so what someone may just rattle off a test name, but the subtlety is in how that test is conducted and what the meaning of that value is. And if the receiving scientist is seeing a lab value or a test result which isn't what they're expecting, is it because patient truly the data is reflective of what is going on in the patient, or is it because someone mapped the wrong test and they're seeing data which is different from what they expected to see? So that's why the mapping is critical. And so we spend a lot of time looking at those ontologies, because an ontology really is that dictionary, it's that definition. It decreases the ambiguity in the language that we use. So it's critical that we work with our partners on both sides to get that mapping correct so there isn't ambiguity and there aren't assumptions made. We need to make sure that there aren't assumptions, that the data that flows over is exactly what is expected.
Okay, thanks.